Mindfulness in the classroom, focus and attention in a third grade classroom. My research question is, how do mindfulness activities and practices affect the focus of students when implemented in a third grade classroom? The purpose of this study is to see if mindfulness will help increase the time on task during independent work and decrease the amount of times I have to redirect their focus during independent work in class lessons. The setting of this study is my third grade classroom in a public school in a suburban community. I have 22 third grade students, 11 boys and 11 girls. 4 of those students are African Americans, 3 are of mixed ethnicities, 2 are Native Americans, and 13 are Caucasians. I have 1 student who has an IEP and receives reading and math services, 1 student that receives extra reading services, and 1 student who receives speech services. As part of my research, I found many studies and articles to support using mindfulness in an elementary school classroom. Although mindfulness is not a new intervention, it is a growing trend in the elementary school community. I found mindfulness to be defined in a few different ways. One of them is a metacognitive strategy used to regulate thoughts and emotions, and a second one being present, moment focused. Both of those I found to be very helpful in supporting my research. I also found that mindfulness can help elementary school students in a variety of ways. One of them is helping them with behavior issues and academics, as well as reducing anxiety symptoms and attention problems. All of those factors come together to play a big role in a student's ability to stay focused. So I felt that finding studies and articles that show the progress that students can make based on mindfulness was really helpful. The second part of my literature review focuses more on the strategies and interventions that I used. So I chose to do yoga-based interventions because there was a lot of research to support it in an elementary classroom and for elementary age children. I also found studies that were beneficial in meditation and guided breathing, which is something that I also decided to use in my classroom. I also found studies that were proven to be effective for students with ADHD. And although that was not my main focus, I wanted to find a way to reach all of my students, which is another reason why I decided on mindfulness-based interventions. I decided to have 2 5-minute intervention times, and I decided on those 2 times based on my baseline data. After looking at my baseline data, I noticed 2 major transition periods that my students struggled with the most. The first one being coming back from specials, and the second one was coming back from lunch and recess. So we had a 5-minute mindfulness time from 10:25 to 10:30 a.m. and another 5-minute mindfulness time from 1:10 to 1:15 p.m. In the morning, the interventions we used were breathing exercises and mindful coloring. And in the afternoon, we used yoga interventions. To track my students' progress, I had a focus tracker, which I kept with me throughout the school day, and it was a chart that divided our school day up into different subject areas. Each time I noticed a student off task or unfocused, I would put a tally next to their name for that subject area. It was a way for me to track my individual students' progress as well as the class as a whole. Then every Friday I would give my students a survey, and they were able to rate themselves on their ability to stay focused and also their ability to not distract others, because that is another key factor in our class having success. I also chose 4 focused students. I chose 2 that I did not have to redirect their focus at all during baseline data week, and they also rated themselves very high in their first student survey. I chose 1 boy and 1 girl for that. I also chose 2 other students, another boy and another girl, that really struggled to stay focused, but were not diagnosed with any other attention or did not have any other diagnosis. For data analysis, I noticed that my students continuously decreased the amount of times I noticed them off task or unfocused. each week they continued to make progress in their ability to stay focused. They also noticed the improvements in themselves, and I was able to see that through their student reflections. On their student reflections, I also asked them to write down any times that they used mindfulness practices on their own, so not during our time in class. And I asked them to describe why they used them and how it was helpful. For my student interviews, 3 of my focus students really liked the activities and noticed a difference in their ability to stay focused. However, 1 student did not enjoy the activities and did not make many improvements, and that is possibly because they chose not to participate fairly often. These 2 graphs show some of the data that I collected. Again, this is for my focus tracking that I did to track my class progress as well as individual students. And because each subject area is not the same amount of time, I averaged it out to see the amount of times I had to redirect student focus per half hour. Math Center's reading and writing were the 3 that my students really struggled with the most. And Math Centers comes right after our transition from specials, and writing comes right after our transition from lunch and recess. So again, that's why I chose to do my mindfulness interventions right before those 2 time periods. Although every single subject area made improvements, Math Center's reading and writing really made the greatest improvements as far as focus and attention goes. This graph focuses on our 3 subject areas that they struggled with the most in the very beginning, and it's a better visual to show the decrease per week that my students made. After 6 weeks of practicing mindfulness in the classroom, my students showed that they were able to stay focused longer on independent tasks, and they're also able to pay attention during class lessons longer and participate more. Again, my students made the greatest improvement during subject areas that directly followed mindfulness practices, and they also showed more confidence in their abilities to stay focused, and I was able to see that through their weekly reflections. I have really found that students need and crave that time to clear their head and be present in the present moment. It's not something that my students had been taught how to do before, and they really love it. They love seeing the difference that it makes in themselves. Next, I plan on surveying my students to see which mindfulness activities they enjoy the most and which ones they think help them out the most, and I will continue to implement those activities throughout the school year. I recommend finding the transition periods that your students struggle with the most and implementing a quick 5-minute mindfulness activity to help redirect their attention and help them get back to that mindset where they are ready to learn.